Hi guys, it's G-Economics here, and it's Friday the 14th of October, and so what I want to do very quickly is to just bring you the feedback video for Year 11 for the A591 paper. That's the June 2012 paper, question 2, which of course we did in the lesson this week. So this will form the basis of your DIT for the coming week. So let's get to it. Quite a lot in this one actually to talk to you about, and things that you can work on and improve for the next time. So let's have a look first of all, ladies and gentlemen, at this set of data which you were given in the first couple of questions, and you're asked to interpret this data. So this data shows the percentage change in prices, and it's house prices on this one, and you're asked in a couple of the questions, you're asked to interpret the data. Now people often find this a little bit difficult and can often make some careless mistakes in it, but actually it's very straightforward. Oftentimes you'll get this sort of data presented with inflation numbers, and again people tend to fall into the same old trap. So what people do wrong is the following. If we look at November of 2009 and then December and then January of 2010, we can see that the bars on the chart are falling, falling, falling. And so what people oftentimes do is they think to themselves, okay, that means that in this instance, for example, house prices in November, December and January must have been falling. No, 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 ladies and gentlemen, look at the data. It's the percentage change in price per month. So in November, house prices went up by 1.3%, let's call it. In December, house prices went up by 0.6, 0.7%. In January, although it's very minor still, house prices were still rising by about 0.4%. So it is obviously therefore totally wrong to say that in those 3 months house prices were falling. They weren't falling, they were rising, but at a slower, rate. And those of you who got that one wrong, that is exactly the trap that you fell into in getting that question wrong. So nota bene, ladies and gentlemen, note that one well for future. You're often given data like this to interpret, and oftentimes that is the very basic and elementary mistake which is made. So that was that question, 2B part 2. If I may go back to B part 1, where you're asked to interpret the data for September 2009 and February 2010. Now I could see, so September 9 and February 10, I could see from the annotations that many of you had made on your papers that you were looking at the correct months, but somehow or another you read the data incorrectly. So for example, 3 or 4 of you said that in February of 2010 house prices fell by 2%. Well, it's nowhere near the 2% line, ladies and gents, so obviously that is wrong. So, nota bene once again. Moving on to the next question. State and explain 2 possible reasons why house prices might fall. So, and again, I would say, looking back at this previous one, when you read this one, some of you may have thought, oh, well, that must mean that B part 2, house prices are falling, given that C follows on from this part. But no, be independent thinkers, be brave, and stick to your guns. 9 times out of 10, you'll be right. State and explain 2 possible reasons why house prices might fall. Okay, I'd like to use a couple of diagrams here, ladies and gents. I was delighted to see that 1 or 2 of you did draw some diagrams for this. So basically what we're trying to think of here, if we're thinking like the examiner, we're thinking what would cause demand to shift left and hence prices to fall, or what would cause supply to shift right and hence prices to fall. So many of you, and 1 or 2 of you even drew the diagrams to aid your analysis, and I think that's a good practice, ladies and gentlemen, because it helps you to think through what's actually happening in the model. So demand curve shifting to the left, things that you might have considered writing. So you could have obviously said fall in income. You'll remember, the acronym PASIFIC, P-A-S-I-F-I-C. All of those factors, population, advertising, subsidies, etc. Population, advertising, substitutes, etc. they all cause demand to shift. So had you said a decrease in income, that would be fine. Had you said a decrease in advertising and presented properly, you'd be fine. So anything which is relevant and well explained, be fine. Supply, things which shift the supply curve to the right. So again, you're trying to think to yourself, okay, well, what would shift supply to the right? And hence, I could put that as my bullet point and then give an answer. So some of you mentioned improvements in technology, and therefore firms were more productive, hence they were able to lower the cost of production and pass that cost reduction on to us, the consumer. Some of you talked about a firm getting a subsidy from the government. Okay, fair enough, if you related it properly. But one or two things which did crop up, which I just want to mention very briefly, are a loan and the house price. And you know, of course, that the term used to describe a loan on a house is a mortgage. Well, a mortgage and the house price, they will not always be the same value. Indeed, nowadays, it's pretty much impossible to get a 100% mortgage anyway. So therefore, if you were buying a house, let's say for 200,000, you couldn't get a mortgage for 200,000. Maybe you could get one for 180,000, something like that. So straight away, there you can see that the value on the mortgage is not always the same as the house price. Now, some of you this caused you a little bit of confusion, because you then started to discuss reasons why demand and supply might change, relating it to the interest rate, the bank rate, as we've been looking at in the monetary transmission mechanism. And you were saying things like, well, if the interest rate goes up, then the mortgage goes up and the house price goes up. Now, one of those things might be true. So if the interest rate goes up and you're on a variable rate mortgage, then yes, it's more than likely that your mortgage repayment will go up. But that's not necessarily going to push the value of your house up. Indeed, probably the opposite, because fewer people will be taking mortgages out. Therefore, the demand for housing will fall, and so when the demand curve shifts left, as you know, the price actually falls rather than rises. So you need to get it clear in your mind, the difference between a mortgage and the house price. And then the other thing was, one or two of you, for Aaron, for example, you did this really well. I talked about interest rates and exchange rates, and we've been talking about that lately. So you mentioned that when the value of sterling depreciates, that means that our import costs go up, and so you were talking about the fact that if builders' raw material costs go up, then they might have to put house prices up, and hence the demand for housing might fall. And that's a very sophisticated answer, very well done indeed. So, excellent stuff there. And then lastly, into our discussion question. Now this discussion question focused on something which I'm doing quite a lot with Year 13 at the moment actually, which is the labour market and workers' wages and so on. Discuss the effects of an increase in the demand for housing on the demand for construction workers and their wages. Now, first things first, ladies and gentlemen, let's remember that the demand for construction workers is a derived demand. What does derived mean? It means comes from. Where does the demand for builders come from? The demand for builders comes from the demand for houses. Many of you used in your explanation the term complementary, builders and housing. Fair enough, but derived demand is really what we're looking for here. And really, in terms of your analysis and discussion, you should have had these, preferably these two diagrams would really have been tip-top. So, taking this one on the left first of all, where we've got the labour market diagram, supply of labour, demand for labour, quantity of labour and the wage. Be very careful on your labels on these, ladies and gentlemen. Many of you got these incorrect. But this is a perfect diagram for initial analysis to show demand for workers increasing, and as a consequence that pushing their wage rate up. And as ever, ladies and gentlemen, indicating the direction of travel both on the y and x axis, always good practice. And then we come to the evaluation section. So I'm just going to spin around here, ladies and gentlemen, make sure this is in focus and in picture. Yes, it is. Tip top. Now, only one person used this diagram, and this is very sophisticated type of analysis. So, talking here about supply of labour. So we've got SS. Now, the double S on this one stands for skilled labour, and SU stands for unskilled labour. And you can see here we've got two demand curves, which I haven't labelled up, D1 and D2. If we go from D1 first of all, where it intersects the unskilled labour supply curve, being the very elastic one, this is the wage, WU1, and the skilled labour, WS1. So you can see quite a difference between the two. But then even more markedly, we see when the demand shifts to the right, the unskilled worker's wage goes from here to here, but the skilled labourers goes from here to here. Very significant increase in the wage rate due to the elasticity of supply. So in terms of your discussion, a nice little discussion surrounding the elasticity of supply and whether or not construction firms have to employ lots of this type of labour or lots of this type of labour, and the extent to which wages would rise, that would form a tip-top discussion at the end of your question D. So look forward to reading all this, ladies and gentlemen, and congratulations to DC, who scored 20 out of 20 on this one. Tip-top DC. See you next time.